so-called straw purchasers, people who are able to legally buy guns and then distribute them on the black market?
We know there's so many stories, and just to recount a few, the governor talked about some of these. We had a police officer in New Hartford, Pennsylvania, who was murdered in 2006. The gun was traced back to a person who had bought 16 handguns in a period of 3 months and been out selling them on the street to convicted felons. 3 other of those weapons, besides the one that was used to kill that police officer, were traced to scenes of gun crimes. This is an epidemic, and if you talk to Chief Harper here in Pittsburgh, the one priority he says that he would like to get from the General Assembly in terms of a tool, it's not the cure-all, but a tool to address gun violence and to convict criminals who are out there convicting gun crimes, is the ability to trace back weapons that are used, that are claimed by people to be lost or stolen, or 1 gun a month. That's what these bills are about. They're reasonable restrictions. 1 gun a month means somebody who's married can buy 24 a year. Not too unreasonable a restriction on people.
Why not try to crack down on straw purchasers?
We actually have laws in the books already against straw purchasers, which is somebody purchasing a weapon and then transferring it illegally to another individual, and then of course that individual a lot of times will use that weapon in criminal activity. We have laws in the books. We have convictions, and looking at 3 recent consecutive years of convictions for straw purchaser type convictions in Pennsylvania, there was close to 100 each year. I think it was in the 80 to 90 range. I think the most recent year, I believe, was 2005 or 2006 when we saw that there were 97 convictions. More than 50% of the time, they are being given probation. There was a recent report, even here in Pittsburgh, where a lady purchased 7 firearms and transferred those illegally and was given 10 years probation. 10 years probation for a problem that Representative Frankel claims is epidemical. I mean, if you have under 100 of these per year that are being convicted in a population of over 12 million people, I wouldn't exactly say it's an epidemic. I would say that we have an epidemic in the courts, in the DA's office, with the laws not being used that are on the books to prosecute to the fullest extent of the law. We need better enforcement, and we need appropriate sentencing. You can't give people probation. Over 50% of the people that are convicted being given probation for these straw purchases.
Let me say, I mean, the whole idea that the gun advocates say that we aren't enforcing laws. We have 16,000 more prisoners incarcerated in state and county prisons in Pennsylvania than we did 10 years ago, an increase of 30%.
That has nothing to do with the number of people given probation.
We are enforcing the law. And the governor has been tough on crime. We have 73 people who have death warrants signed on. We have the 4th highest population of people on death row in Pennsylvania.
How many have been given?
We are enforcing the law, and if you talk to law enforcement, we need additional tools in order to convict people who are providing these weapons on the street. We have an 83% increase in the number of police officers who have been shot at in the state of Pennsylvania. That's far higher. 18% nationally, 83% here. We have an increase of 32% in homicides by firearms, many of them that are being transferred illegally. Police unanimously across the state of Pennsylvania.
It's easy to say it. Prove it.
Police unanimously across the state have asked for these tools. They want to be able to enforce the law, protect Pennsylvanians, and they need these tools. They don't answer all the problems, but they believe, and I think many of us believe, that putting restrictions on the sale and the transfer of weapons is a very important tool for law enforcement.
I want to get into the philosophical thing one moment more with you, Mr. Frankel, as I promised. If we take the Bill of Rights and all the amendments, 25, I think, of the Constitution as a whole, they're all important issues, and we don't parse them. Well, we parse them, but we don't cut them and slice them that much. And I wondered if you think that it's okay to slice up or to restrict the rights in the Second Amendment. Was it okay to say, let's go to some other amendments? Women's votes. Should maybe not all women get votes? Should maybe not all press be protected? Should maybe not all of the Establishment Clause, which is dear to many people and probably to both of us, should maybe that not fully be enforced?
Look, I'm not an attorney. That's why we have a judiciary. That's why we have a Supreme Court. That's why we have a state court system. And when you take a look at these laws that we're talking about with respect to gun regulations, each one of the laws that we're talking about here, 1 gun a month, mandatory reporting of lost and stolen weapons, and not having a preemption of local governments having strong gun laws, these laws exist in other states and other cities. Not one has been overturned by a state Supreme Court. Not one has been overturned by the federal Supreme Court.
And again, not advocating either side, Mr. I wonder whether if it's okay to restrict the right to bear arms, it's okay to restrict the right for women to vote.
I don't believe so. And I believe that there is no interpretation there. I think there is interpretation and regulation, as there is with free speech, that there are reasonable regulations. And again, you have the protection in this country of a democratic society where people will not tolerate elected officials moving towards unreasonable restrictions.
Give me an example of a state or a city that has these types of laws that have just gone down in Pennsylvania where they have made a difference and people are safer.
Well, Philadelphia has the highest rate of homicides in the country, of violent crime, gun crime in the country, and it goes beyond that, robberies at gunpoint as well. New York City has a one gun per 90-day law in New York City. And it's a larger city with all kinds of complex problems, many similar to Philadelphia. It has 50% of the violent crime rate as the city of Philadelphia. They have the strongest gun laws, some of the strongest gun laws in the country. Other cities and states across the country, we know that, for instance, Virginia has a one gun a month law on the books, believe it or not. And we know that since they have that law on the books, there is a reduction of 54% of the number of weapons that are used in crimes in New York and New Jersey that can be traced back to Virginia.
Washington, D.C. has banned handguns for decades. Chicago, it's illegal to own a handgun unless you had it 20 years ago. How can you say that those laws, and I take what you said about New York, but how can you say that gun control is working in Washington and in Chicago?
I've never said that gun control or these laws are the answer. I mean, it's a complex issue, gun violence across the board. There are many elements to it, and I would never advocate that this is going to be the issue that solves the problem. It's a tool that law enforcement, they are tools that law enforcement looks to help them enforce the law and protect us. Some places that have other issues, like Washington, D.C. and Chicago. It works in New York. I think you need to have some time to take a look at how these operate.
I wanted to ask both of you gentlemen, given that there are a lot of controversial things in a document that we regard as not controversial, the Constitution and its amendments, given of all the amendments, one of the most contentious ones, I think we'd agree, is the Second Amendment. We've had millions of cases about the First Amendment, lots of due process, 14th Amendment, voting rights issues. How come we haven't had a big case in front of the Supreme Court since 1939 on this issue? What does that say about our society, or what does it say about the politics of this issue? I don't know myself. I wondered whether you do.
Well, I think the politics of the issue is that the majority of citizens support the right of law-abiding citizens to bear arms. And I think the Supreme Court has recognized that in the history of our nation. And I think the history of the amendment has shown that the majority of states have recognized it as an individual right, even in their own state constitutions, as the Pennsylvania Constitution, Article 1, Section 21, that makes it very clear that the right of the citizens to bear arms in defense of themselves in the state shall not be questioned.
I agree. People do support the right to bear arms, but they support reasonable restrictions. We've had independent polling that shows that 70% of Pennsylvanians, including people who self-identify themselves as gun owners, would support legislation like one gun a month and the mandatory reporting of loss.
But Dan, your reasonable restrictions are restrictions that those of us that actually really support the Second Amendment believe ultimately is going to erode it. That they are only restrictions on law-abiding citizens because criminals ignore the laws. As was mentioned, D.C. has a higher violent crime rate with firearms than Philadelphia even, and they've outright banned firearms. Even people who use them for their employment there can't get permits to even have them in their own home for self-defense.
But the more you guys talk, the more I think, and tell me whether you think I'm right in believing this, that this isn't a question about whether the Second Amendment means only militia can own guns or individuals can own guns. It isn't a question about whether you can own nuclear weapons or not. It's a question about one man's or one woman's view of what's reasonable versus another person's view of what's reasonable. And that's not really a huge constitutional issue, is it?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of what's reasonable as much as a matter of what's constitutional. As we said, the right of the people that they shall be able to bear arms, that they shall not be questioned in the Pennsylvania
But you were the one who told me that this should be reasonable restrictions on some of the more outlandish things.
I said there's. I mean, what you're calling a reasonable restriction, 1 gun a month, and turning law-abiding citizens.
I'm not advocating one thing or the other.
I understand that. You've said that several times. I understand that. But as Dan had mentioned, reporting of lost or stolen firearms, the way that the legislation is written could turn law-abiding citizens who have a firearm lost or stolen and don't realize it, that could have them up on charges. There's legislation like that that's going to infringe on the right to bear arms. And overall, I think that even as much as Dan would oppose this statement, I believe it all points to that incremental approach that Angel Cruz ultimately was running a bill, House Bill 760, that would actually start to disarm law-abiding citizens.
I'll give you 10 seconds. We got to close.
Well, I think Representative Metcalfe talks about these restrictions in an arbitrary way. Ultimately, I think that it's armed. Its definition is arms. It's not guns. So David Sherman said the right thing. Ultimately, that where do you draw the distinction? Is it assault weapons? Is it bazookas? Is it M16s? Is it tanks?
Got to go. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Appreciate you being here. We'll take a break back.